This is Joe at the Cornell Halloween party. Just show you a couple of pictures. And this is Joe agonizing about some of his theoretical frameworks, which he's been instrumental in bringing out, talking about in terms of what predominates, is it SIDE or SIP or Q's filtered out, and he needs a wandering now to the definitive answer there. And this I thought was really cool. He has both John and Paul on his mind. And not the Rattles, thankfully. And this was when Joe was theorizing with the concept of the three-dimensional human. And this is, in many ways, this is what would be truly apt. This is something which Cliff Nash mentioned to me last year when I was having lunch with him at Stanford. And to most of us, when we think about it in terms of all the theoretical work that's gone on in terms of computer-mediated communication, most of us would tend to agree that Joe's been the forefront of spurring theoretical research in this. In fact, I don't think there's been a single person who's done any work looking at it in terms of impression formation effects, looking at mediated interpersonal communication, especially in the context of using computer networks in a variety of different settings and domains, who hasn't cited or who hasn't been heavily influenced by Joe's work. Joe was just telling me at lunch, Peter and Jessica was also around, that his classic 1996 article, he has a lot of classic articles, but the classic 1996 article in Com Research, which really spoke about computer-mediated communication and spoke about it in terms of impersonal, interpersonal, hyperpersonal interaction perspectives, that just got cited for the 1,000th time, that particular article. So we're just talking about one article here. And when I say that, many people have pointed out Joe's resemblance to both Jerry Garcia and Peter Jackson, and he's as distinguished in his domain as they are in theirs. And Joe is currently a professor in Michigan State, and you all know about his theoretical work, so I'm not really going to expound on those because I'm going to let him talk about some of those things. And he has had appointments in psychology, information technology, a variety of different leadership positions, especially at ICA, and also the Academy of Management. And like I said, his work is something which has really influenced many of us who look at it in so many different areas of computer-mediated communication. His recent work, he's been theorizing about some aspects of Web 2.0, the participatory web, and really been looking at some aspects of multiple agent interfaces. So without much further ado, welcome to Chapel Hill, and over to you.
I never made the connection before this very moment. The people have been citing my work because they think I make films under the name of Peter Jackson, but I write articles under the name of Joe Walther, and they wanted to see one has to another. I think Sri is delusional in that he thinks I look like Peter Jackson. Everyone else thinks, I get Jerry Garcia a lot. People come up to me and in one form or another they ask me, they mention some kind of resemblance to Jerry Garcia, not Peter Jackson. Only Sri thinks I look like Peter Jackson. This happened with enough frequency that I can now tell you there are 3 versions of the Jerry Garcia approach. One is the basic Garcia, where somebody says, has anybody ever told you how much you look like Jerry Garcia? Then the second one is the true deadhead version. Has anybody ever told you you look like Jerry Garcia at the Oakland concert in 1973? And then there's now the meta Garcia, where someone says, you must get the Jerry thing a lot. So the Peter Jackson thing is just Sri's imagination. Thank you for having me here today. Thanks everybody for coming out. As some of you may remember, I was here 4 years ago and was talking at that time about some of my research on virtual groups. And I'd like to pick up where I left off from last time, because last time I was here, I talked about some discoveries we had made in terms of the relational dynamics of people working together online. But there are a number of questions that have become apparent through that work. This is always the case when you're having fun doing research. You answer some questions, then even better ones come up. And I've been lucky that way too, to have more questions than answers. But some questions came up in terms of some of the behaviors that we've seen in a lot of virtual distributed groups about how people are relating to the partners of theirs that seem to be somewhere else. And some of their comments brought up attribution theory, as I'll show you in just a moment. And so I'd like to, when I was here last, I spoke about an experiment we were just starting. We were just starting data collection when I was here. Sri remembers. I don't know if anybody else remembers. It'll come. Those of you who are here, it'll come back to you when I show you a couple of slides you've seen before. we have results from that study now. It's a massive study, and a number of interesting things came out of it. So I'd like to talk to you about that today. And the other study I'd like to talk to you about is a replication and extension of a theory that was published 30 years ago, not by me. It was a theory of electronic propinquity by Felipe Corzeni, published in 1978, and then essentially disappeared. And we brought it back from the dead, and I think for good reason and with interesting results. And so I'll tell you what electronic propinquity is, and why we think it works, and how it applies to new communication technology. So as I mentioned, as Sri mentioned, my research for some time has focused on the relational communication aspects of computer-mediated communication. How do people perceive one another online? How do they relate to one another online? How are these dynamics different than we're accustomed to in face-to-face situations? Much of the research in the entire area of computer-mediated communication started with the question, what happens when the cues that we encounter from one another are different or are absent in relation to the cues that we're accustomed to in face-to-face interaction? That was the start. How will people respond to the absence of cues, period? Several of us have taken different positions on will there be some kind of adaptation. In my own work, we've looked at, do people substitute new kinds of cues for the nonverbal cues that are no longer here? How does the passage of time and behavior over time affect impressions and relationships? And how do people actually learn or come to use communication technology in opportunistic ways? How are people sometimes able to affect extraordinary levels of intimacy precisely because they do not see each other? And that was the focus of that 1996 paper that Sri mentioned. And I think that notion is, although it's still somewhat exotic in some respects for people who have not experienced a strong affinity with somebody online, I think it's not quite so shocking that other people have anymore. That people have met one another in formed relationships, who met on Match.com and then emailed and then got married and are not freaks, I think is now recognized. So how these things come about has really been a focus for some time. And from that, we can hopefully derive what are the conditions that we can employ or that we can trigger in online interaction that'll promote good or even better relations people might have face-to-face. Last time I was here, I talked about some of the virtual groups that I've had my students go through. And we put them online. When I was at Northwestern, we had virtual groups from Northwestern students in Manchester, England. And in each of the face-to-face classrooms, we would hear these comments being made. What's wrong with those Brits? What's wrong with those Americans? Why do they communicate so poorly? Why are they so bad at this? Why are they driving us crazy? Similar comments when I was in upstate New York doing a project at Rensselaer Polytechnic, a very technologically oriented university, with the students at University of Kansas. We were hearing these comments going on: clueless farmers and gearhead slackers. At Cornell and Rutgers, I don't know if I had this experience last time I was here. That was the first time where I heard these major outgroup denigrations going on. Maybe the exact same criticism was being levied. We were hearing the Cornell students saying, what's wrong with those people? They can't write. And at Rutgers, the students were saying about Cornell, what's wrong with those people? They can't write. We're going, how can this be? So we probed, we talked to the students involved. We found out those Rutgers people, they can't write a complete sentence. And then those Cornell people, they start using these long words and sentences. So everybody thinks that the other one can't write, but for completely different reasons, from different ends of the scale in terms of their abilities and skills and orientations toward writing. But it's always those people, and each of these slides has been those people, those Brits, those Americans, those farmers, those Cornellians, whoever it is, there always seems to be some outgroup attribution going on. And that's been a consistent finding, and it's been a point of interest for us. Attribution theory comes to mind in terms of looking at this. And we've used attribution theory to guide some of our research in looking into this phenomenon, but a particular flavor of attribution theory. So as I mentioned, I'd like to talk to you about our virtual groups experiment and our research into the question, are attributions affected by CMC and people being distributed in different places? Do attributions affect relationships and influence? And then oh yes, and another question related to this: CMC experiments support hyperpersonal communication. Field studies and surveys show that CMC is inferior. Why? We'll address this in the electronic propinquity study. The last time I was here, we were just starting data collection from some groups we put together to help us answer these questions about attribution and distance. This is our big virtual groups project. We put together groups of 4 people who worked together online over a 2-week period, and I'll tell you what the task was that they worked on in just a moment. But the schools involved in this project were Cornell and Rensselaer, Ohio State, Texas Tech, Merritt Community College in California, McMaster University in Canada. So any given team, teams were composed so that all 4 members might come from one university. This would be the co-located group condition. Co-located members comprised the entirety of the group. Or we had a completely distributed condition where the 4 members came from 4 different colleges, and we also had a mixed condition, 2 members from the same school and 2 members from another school. One member 4 is in red in each of these conditions because, as I'll explain in a moment, the 4th member of each group, all members of the group got information packets with which to help to make a recommendation. Information to compare notes and make a decision about which of 3 community revitalization projects should get funded. And there were lots of pros and cons to deal with. But the information, it was a hidden profile design. And what that means is that any given person's information would not lead to the best answer. You have to put together everybody's information, add up all the pros and cons, and then the best answer would come out differently than any one person could see by his or herself. Members 1, 2, and 3 all got information leading to the same wrong conclusion. Member 4 got a packet of information leading to a different but also wrong conclusion. Again, if you put all the information together, you get to yet a 3rd conclusion, which would be the best one. We did this in order to see what would happen if we had one member of the group with a different and minority opinion than the other members of the group. What would happen to that person's level of influence? What judgments might be made about that person, who sometimes was a co-located group member, sometimes was right there, right next to member 3, or sometimes was way out on his own. And so those are some of the dynamics we were able to look at. Any questions? Please stop me, because I know these studies and they're close to my heart, and so I don't know if I'm not explaining something well. Please.
Did the group members know where the others were?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. One of the reasons we want to do this research, our basic interest in virtual groups, and I'll show you just how they do that. I give you a quick answer, the longer answers come. One of the reasons we want to look at virtual groups in general is that groups are composed, generally speaking and traditionally, they capitalize on the diversity of knowledge and experiences of the members. If this is true, groups should get better decisions than individuals. And this should be especially true for virtual groups who can have people in different places with different local knowledge, different kinds of expertise, and bring them together. But research shows groups traditionally don't share information very well or very effectively. How that might happen in virtual groups, even more questions. So hidden profile research says people in the same room don't share information and influence each other very well. What happens when we look at that online? So here's more details. I've told you some of them about the virtual groups project. Distribution of 4 group members among the different schools, distribution of incomplete sets of task information following this hidden profile structure. 3 people had majority opinion information sets, 1 person had a minority opinion information set. They communicated online through an asynchronous electronic discussion board for 2 weeks. We asked them their decision about the task before they started their 2-week chat, and then we got their group decision after the chat, the 2-week discussion was over. We analyzed the communication records of what pieces of information they mentioned, and we had them fill out questionnaires when they were done as well. Here's the longer answer about how they knew who was where. As you logged into the bulletin board system that we used, this was hosted on the Cornell information servers. As you logged in, you had to go through this screen to get into your group discussion board. So here's the login screen for your group, and in this, for those. The writing is small. It's giving the name and then the school logo for each of the members. So this is a group composed of 1 person from Rensselaer, 1 from Cornell. This is Merritt College in California, and then Ohio State. So this shows you one of the conditions, and this is how they knew who was where.
Were they students?
These were all students. Yes.
Were they allowed to communicate by other means, especially if they were in the same school and could potentially meet each other on campus or something?
Were they allowed to communicate offline? We thought very carefully about that. Usually I try to control that for the sake of experimental concerns. This time we decided to let it go and see what would naturally happen. And we tracked it very carefully. We asked them to post test measures, did anybody communicate through any other means? Only one group used instant messenger as any other means of communication. So we didn't constrain it this time. And you always worry, you know, that you lose some experimental control, but we wanted this. We were facing so much mess in this study. We decided to let it get messy and see what happens anyway. Here's a co-located group of 4. In most cases, wherever we could at these different universities, we brought in people who were taking different courses. So the chances that they'd be running into each other on a weekly or every other daily basis was lower. But of course, who knows? This is another way to represent our conditions. Here's a mixed distributed group, 2 people together and then 2 isolates, where the minority information is in the co-located subgroup, where the minority information is out there, a co-located group, and then a completely distributed group. Yes?
I was noticing in your conditions that you had a different mix of genders in each group. Were there any of these groups where the minority person was the only representative of gender?
It's quite likely. We didn't do anything about that systematically. We saw no gender effects in the analysis. And I couldn't tell you how close to a balanced design we would have for that variable, because we did not worry about that from the outset. There we go. Does co-location and distribution, 2 questions we're going to address from the data today. One is about how people influence one another. And then the second question, what kind of attributions do people make for their own behavior based on the different conditions that they were in? So the first question was very interesting to us. How do these different distributions affect how influential people are? Especially if you are the minority person, what are your chances about being able to influence the decision? Will people write you off if you're way out there, or will people pay attention to you? Does co-location distribution affect the influence of influence? We drew on social identification theory, but social identification theory itself has many theories and they're complicated. So I'm trying to go through them simply. Basic assumption in social identification theory, the theory that tells us about in-group favoritism and out-group denigration, is we probably don't like out-group members and we don't think their opinions are very important. So the basic dynamic of in-group favoritism and out-group denigration would suggest a double minority effect for this person and for this person. If you're not co-located and you differ from everybody, forget it. You will not have any influence on the other members of the group. You're too different. You're not worth the effort. But what about minority information members who are co-located with others, either because everybody's in the same group or because they're in a co-located subgroup? What would we predict for that? Different theories have suggested different things. Marquez and colleagues suggest that there's a black sheep effect. An in-group deviant is disparaged and less influential than even an out-group member. So here's the 4 of us together, and this person has the audacity to differ in his opinion and suggest something else. After all, we really are just college sophomores trying to get this over with and get our extra credit. Or we really are executives in this organization who need to make this decision and don't want to spend all our lives struggling with it. And this person is going the other way, slowing us down, and acting like he's not one of the group. That person ought to be despised and ought to be uninfluential. That would be the black sheep effect. A traitor is even less influential than an out-group member might be. Alternatively, William Crano has posited an in-group leniency contract hypothesis. And you know this will be good because it has such a complicated name. But in this one, Crano suggests when an in-group member deviates from the rest of the group somewhat, not too much, but somewhat, it makes the group curious. Why would somebody who's just like us be saying these things that are so different from the rest of us? And that kind of level of uncertainty or dissonance causes people to do an information search. What's going on? Why is he acting this way? Let's go over our notes again. And in that case, the minority deviant, the slight deviant, actually becomes more influential on the rest of the group than the other members might be. Now, if that deviant goes too far, you get a black sheep effect. But if they're just different enough, it prompts a lot of examination in the process. So far, so good. A different theory. Here we go. Congruity theory applied to virtual groups by Catherine Phillips and colleagues takes us to this basic variation of balance theory and says, you know, people who we think are like us should know what we know. People who are different from us should know different things than us. And so if a minority opinion holder is in the same co-located group as us, that person should be saying the same thing as us. If they say something different, we won't even notice, and we certainly wouldn't pay attention. That person would be uninfluential. If, on the other hand, a minority information person is out there, they're in a different location, we'll be tuned in to the things that they know that are different than we will. We'll be very sensitive to that. That person should be very influential.
So they didn't know that they had different information in their packets?
The only clue we gave them was one sentence in their instructions out of a lot of sentences and a lot of information, saying very explicitly, but small, that not everybody may have the same information, but you all have enough information as a group to come to the best decision. And the best decision gets you an iPod for each member of the group. Yeah. So, like, what's not to like about that? Yes.
Did Phillips et al., when they applied this using specifically geographical differences, or was that applied, I guess, greater differences between them?
You know, I can't remember exactly. I think they may have used different majors and so forth. I think their research was all done at the Kellogg School at Northwestern. It didn't involve geography, but I can't remember how they manipulated the in-group, out-group stuff. Do you happen to know?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I could remember. It was an interesting article. So congruity theory, minority leniency contract, black sheep hypothesis, all these things describing perhaps the same phenomenon, different theoretical expectations about it. That's kind of fun when three smart theories don't predict the same thing. Here again, I'm sorry, a review of these positions we just went over. We determined we could calculate people's opinion change and people's influence by seeing who changed their mind. We could see if majority members changed their mind by looking at the decisions that they gave us prior to the discussion and then the group decision afterwards. And we did get data on whether they agreed with the group decision. So we by that measure could see if the people who had the majority information set, how much they changed their mind as a result of the comments of the minority member. The other thing we looked at, which I have to give credit to my student Natalie Bazarova, who found a very nice finding in the group argumentation literature that finds that when was it an outgroup member? No, it was a deviant, somebody with an opposite opinion. When they argue consistently for an opposite opinion, people tend to be more resistant to influence than when arguments are mixed. We thought, now that would be a nice operationalization of the minority leniency requirement that a group member be a little bit different but not too much. So we looked at the consistency of arguments that the minority person in each group made. There were three possible options. The group could choose as best. Well, they had to rank order A, B, and C in terms of the best, second, best, and third. So we counted the number of positive statements about A, plus the negative statements about B, plus the negative statements about C, because A was the best if they argued for A, minus the bad things they said about the alternatives they didn't prefer. And that helped us see how much they argued consistently and how much they argued for balance. Please.
What type of content was included in the information packets?
What kind of?
Content? Was it questions that they had asked or information they needed to find?
It was lots of pros and cons. It was statements of fact that a background, again, this was the town of Brooksfield has been given a good amount of money for redevelopment efforts. Three proposals have been developed, and there's a paragraph about each one. One is downtown entertainment and hotel. Another is neighborhood revitalization. So there's a paragraph about each of those. And then there's about 10 pros and cons about each one. There are also criteria. Must feed X number of, support X number of jobs, this and that. So there's a lot of information. Well, there were those 10 attributes for each project that were systematically varied to represent the number of pros and cons for each of the alternatives. Does that make sense? I think it's hard to grasp without looking kind of at the paper. I'd be glad to pass on papers to you or some other references where they spell this out really well. I'm not trying to obfuscate. I'm trying to give enough to answer your question. Here's our results. After After all that complication, the results are fairly simple. The majority opinions, the majority information holders changed their opinions most when the minority opinion holder was remote and when that person's information was consistent. So here's two of us together and another person, and when that far person argued consistently for another position, we seem to pay attention to that person. When the information was inconsistent, that was most helpful when we heard that from a co-located person. So somebody who was with us together at one school or part of a co-located subgroup. And it was in this condition that the group decisions were actually best out of all the conditions there were. Majority members changed the least when minority opinions were expressed from a co-located member in a consistent way. So we do see support actually for 3 of the different positions. We see this one suggesting that the black sheep effect is true. Somebody who's just like us shouldn't go against the group in a forceful kind of way. If that person is mild and arguing some ways the same as us and some ways different, we see support for the minority leniency contract hypothesis of freedom. If somebody co-located, if somebody's like us showing a little bit of difference, that gets our attention. And process the information well enough the group made the best decision. So these were some of the things we found. Sorry? Oh, yes, question. Please.
How did you determine which decisions were best?
Oh, we have the that's a great question. In hidden profile research in general, there's an a priori schema where we know we have sent out information so that there are 15 pieces of information favoring alternative A, 10 pieces of information favoring alternative B, and only 7 pieces of information that favor alternative C. If a group were to exchange all the information, they would see this. And if the information is clear enough and it is valenced properly, then they should come to the best decision. So it's not that urban renewal projects, it is not that entertainment and hotel complexes are a better way to do urban renewal than downtown neighborhood restoration. It is that the information that the groups were provided should add up to this rather than this one. The next question, we're moving to another subject now, and this is the attributional question. As those of you who know attribution theory will remember, attribution theory, one of the foci of attribution theory is how do we explain why people did what they did when we need to interpret the causes of events. And we make attributions in biased manners. So when something bad happens, when we are the source, when the self is the source of some bad event, we tend to make a situational causal attribution. Why did I do something bad? Well, something out there caused me to do it. We excuse ourselves. Why did a friend of ours or somebody who's similar to us do a bad thing? There was some situation. We've come up with some situational explanation for it. A stranger, ironically, even though we don't really know why they do what they do, we tend to make dispositional attributions. Why did that person do as he did? I don't know. I assume it's because he's a loser or something. Or not smart enough or not well prepared or something. We think that the attributions that people make for their own poor behavior are especially critical in virtual group settings for reasons particularly of scapegoating and scapegoating learning. If people are not recognizing their own faulty behavior in virtual group conduct, and they are blaming it on others rather than themselves, or factors other than themselves rather than their own behavior, if we think that people can adapt to virtual groups, but they scapegoat the cause, then they will not learn how to do anything better. They will always find fault elsewhere, will not re-examine their own behavior, will not improve. So we think attributions for one's own behavior are a particularly important focus in attribution research in virtual groups. And so how might we hypothesize this? We found in the work of Robbins, Mendelsohn, and Spranka that most attribution research tends not to involve a whole lot of people, even though it tends to be about people. There's not interaction among them. Robbins and colleagues' research is an exception to this. And they argue that when people are having social interaction with one another, that in addition to static things in the environment, or buses going by or what have you, people might blame their communication partners as being situational effects on their own behavior. And we thought that scenario, that possibility might fit the virtual team's scenario very well. What's wrong with those Brits? What's wrong with those Americans? Those clueless slackers in Kansas? Those people, not me, caused our group to be having the problems that we're having. And so for these reasons, again, we focus on, do people blame the partners or other factors for their own poor behavior? The self-serving bias could include partner blame. And so these were our hypotheses. In short-term virtual groups, co-located partners, they assume that there are other people who are near them are probably similar to them. They probably assume they're distant partners. They either don't know them or assume that they are unlike them. So our hypotheses were these: more partner blame for one's own poor performance in a distributed group than in a co-located virtual group. And consistent with that, more dispositional self-attributions in co-located groups than distributed groups. In other words, a dispositional self-attribution. Why did I do badly? I didn't work hard enough. I didn't take it seriously. I'm not good at these kinds of things. So that's what we look for in the data. Our method then was, again, from this virtual group study, one of the things that we included in the post-test questionnaire was this question: what was the best thing that you did during the project? And once they wrote that out, it's an open-ended response. We asked, why do you think you did that? But the real question was the next one: what was the worst thing that you did during the group project? Why do you think you did that? We weren't as concerned with what the worst thing was as much as why they did this terrible. And we coded those responses according to these potential attributes. We coded to see if they were dispositional attributes such as references to personality, ability, motivation, etc.
What types of things did they say they did bad, or worse things? Was it really bad?
Didn't participate very much, didn't respond clearly to other people.
Okay, so it
couldn't
wasn't
pay attention.
shot my dog.
No, it was
It had to be
with
the
respect to
virtual
group.
okay, in the group.
Yeah, no dog shootings. It was about the virtual group we did.
Or I ignored my husband for 2 weeks while I was on live or something.
No, it was project
About-
related. Yeah. Yes,
How long was the time frame between the pre-test and post-test?
2 weeks,
2 weeks.
give or take, but a 2-week interaction group. We further coded the open-ended responses as they might have been. I acted this way because of the partners, which was part of what we were looking for. Because of communicating online is hard, you can't tell who people are. Because of geography, people being in different places, other environmental effects, or because the stupid experiment, rigged it and so forth, and I only wanted the iPod or whatever. These were the things we had hypothesized. In some conditions, more self-personality explanations, and in other conditions, more partner effects. We found things very, very much like that. Blaming one's partner occurred much more frequently in the distributed conditions than in the co-located conditions. And the tendency for somebody to say, I was lazy, I didn't pay enough attention, I wasn't very motivated to do this, happened more often when people were all from the same college than when they were distributed. So it's the same behavior, it's just why did they do it? They were much more able to scapegoat. They were more likely to scapegoat in the distributed condition where there were people out there who they might never encounter physically than when it was with the same people. Even though they weren't encountering them physically, they were like them and they acknowledged their own faults, yes.
When did they find out if their group got the answer right, and did that have any effect on their attributions of behaviors?
That would be a great question to explore. We don't know. They filled in they gave us the dependent post-test questions before we told them to do this. There is some research on feedback on group performances, bad feedback and good feedback, and we would want to draw on that to see about this. That'd be a great question. I mean, they probably in the virtual group, they don't know the other people. They're blaming those other people already. They give them bad feedback. Either they hate each other more, or they never come back. It would be interesting to see that. In mixed groups, no effect. And then we thought, we better check something, and I'll take your question in just a second. We thought we better check, well, what if these people were right? What if there was something in the distributed groups where their partners were losers? And maybe the people didn't log on as often, or didn't contribute as much, or started later, or any of those things. So maybe this wasn't just a distortion. Maybe the behavior was different and the attribution was correct. So we thought we better check. And where is it? Oh, here it is. No differences in these conditions, and how long it overall participation frequencies, quality of decisions. So we do think this is a cognitive and attributional distortion rather than a reflection of real behavior. I'm sorry, now you had a question.
You probably mentioned it, but I missed it. Do participants in the same place knew each other personally?
No, we expect they did not.
Okay.
We expect they did not. So 4 Cornell students, all from different sections of the public speaking class, probably never saw each other, but all knew they were from Cornell. 4 students from Ohio State, but from different classes. Isn't that amazing? I mean, what do they really have in common? Well, they go to the same school, and that seems to mean a lot to them. Other research by Bradner and Marks did a wonderful experiment. This was in Irvine, California, at UC Irvine, and they said they put somebody in a lab, and they said you're going to have a chat with somebody. And they said this person. They either said this person's in Boston or this person's somewhere else in Irvine. And in all cases, the person was in Irvine. But when the person thought it was in Boston, much different communication, more deceptive, less interesting, and so forth. So just believing people are somewhere else, whether it's true or not, affects cognition and behavior in interesting kinds of ways that are very disruptive and probably inhibit learning and function. That's all from this particular virtual group study. And as you can see, it's a big project with a lot of data, but guided by some focused questions. There are places for fishing expeditions. We really wanted to learn some important things. We've got some nice answers. Yes,
If you
Don?
go back to your little dots where you have these outliers, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, if you just think about that group for a second, is there anything, instead of comparing their communication horizontally and vertically, is there anything interesting about the way they communicated different from the others? Because they had different set of information. They had slightly different, they were outliers. Just in the patterns of their communication, is there anything different about it? If you treat them as a group and then just go out there, there's
This is a really good question, and this is something that I would be surprised if we didn't look at this. Although I'm sure we didn't have hypotheses about this, but one wonders what happens to the outlier. One wonders what happens to the individual who all of a sudden, after a few comments, realizes he has an opinion that's different from everybody else's.
Yeah.
And would that person get quieter? Would that person get louder? I think that's a really good question. We could do the analysis to find out the answer to that question from the data that we have, but I don't believe we did that.
That's where individual differences might come in too. I mean, how many people are you talking about? Because a strong personality might make a big difference. How many red dots did you have?
One per group?
Yeah, but how many groups?
Lots.
Lots.
I think we had 64 groups altogether. Well, okay, not that much, but lots. Could have been more, but a bunch. But I like that question, though.
Is it possible there are patterns of, I mean, like Rhonda's point, individual variation, which I'm sure there probably is, but if you have numerous ones, there might be patterns of behavior in that particular set of people that would be different from the others. You can even look at it vertically, so to speak. Positions, 2 positions, 3 positions, against position 1. It might be a tricky just do an experiment within your experiment.
Oh, I think that's an interesting possibility. I'm glad to acknowledge that these were very artificial groups. They were composed well enough to, I think, help us answer some very focused questions, but not well enough to allow us to answer some other very organic and interesting questions. Were these people in ongoing organizational relationships of some kind? Would there have been crosstalk within a subgroup, even if it was virtual crosstalk? Even if 2 people worked in the same office and someone worked somewhere else, would these people have been commenting about the others? And we would expect things like that to happen. How would that have affected dynamics over the long term? What if there was some vertical differentiation or hierarchical differentiation in here? What if we made somebody in charge of the rest of the group? Lots of good questions like that to be answered. I like thinking about those questions, though, in terms of attributions that people make and the excuses that they invent for themselves based on what might be the salient characteristics. Would greater leadership knock that nonsense off, or does it depend where the leader is? Those are good questions too.
But wherever the leader is, it's virtual. I mean, to some extent, all groups are virtual.
To some extent, more and more, that's true. Yeah.
But even real groups are somewhat virtual. With the groups that belong to are, in effect, we could be communicating virtually, because in effect we are. Even
Sure.
in the same
Sure.
physical location, they're virtual communities to some extent.
Right. Of course, we all know we're here, rather than knowing that one of us isn't. Perhaps the red dot is the leader. This is a minority position. Maybe the findings that we have about the red dot would map onto how people would
Or
make
if you
every.
reverse and say, did it have to again use your number two person, if there was somebody new without messing up, make a new person the third, some of the communication behaviors would be different. Simply as an artifact of where you are in the position and with the information that you have.
I agree. Lots more questions to come from this. I would hope that this framework provides a really interesting starting place from which to say, okay, well, we know this, but what about if the dynamic were leadership rather than opinion minority and so forth? It'd be a nice place to start and see if things work the same. Maybe that's all leaders are, deviants of a particular kind.
It would almost have to be.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. It would almost have to be. They can't be too much of a deviant. They almost have to be, but not quite.
Almost.
Please.
My husband works at home. He telecommutes. He's often doing teleconferences with people he's never met.
Yeah.
And so this is really interesting in terms of, he knows they're all over the world. So I wonder how this dynamic works for him. But in other groups he's in, they often decide to meet first. So they have a face-to-face meeting first, and then they'll go online and carry out the rest of their business. Do we have any research that suggests that initial medium, initial seeing each other creates the affinity then, so that you're not in the out group even if you're geographically dispersed?
There is some research, there is case study research that has looked at organizational virtual teams and has concluded from them that they are more successful when they meet at least once, better twice. But that research, being case study research, has not experimented with other groups that are forced to communicate for some period of time and never meet and so forth. I think there is a very natural inclination for people to meet face to face when they can. They like it. We're wired to do that. And it's very hard to get controlled research where some people cannot and other people do it in natural settings. So I don't know. There are theories which suggest bad idea to get together before you work virtually. You're better off getting to know each other online. Let's take a look at one. Yes.
Was there any test on the level of trust towards the information?
I'm sorry, one more time, please.
Was there a test on the level of trust with the information provided to the students? Because I imagine if I found that my information was different from the other members of the group, I might tend to acquiesce more, perhaps not defend my position vigorously.
We did measure trust of the other members of the group. We did not ask them, did they trust us, and so forth. But we did observe that in some cases, people said, I think we all have different sets of information. And when we saw this, because we were monitoring everything, we said, yes, right. Now, we didn't say anything to anybody. We said among ourselves, right, okay, figure it out. And sometimes they got closer. In fact, we coded comments when people suggested, let's put all our information together and see what it means. If anybody said that, a group was more likely to reach a better decision. Yeah, we coded all the decision schemes also. That was one of our findings. Groups that said, why don't we just let the majority rule, make the worst decisions? Yes?
I was curious, how explicitly did you tell the students that there was like a correct answer, and how was that linked to getting the iPod? Because I would think motivation would be something that could influence, if they're just getting credit, they're not going to be motivated to really
everybody who participates for 2 weeks and fills out the post-test questionnaire gets credit. The people who get the best answer, there is a best answer, and the group that gets it gets the iPods. Yes?
This is kind of a different question, I'm just curious, but did you see any differences or trends in the attributions when the minority opinion was at the Canadian institution?
There was a very small N on that, and so even if we did, I wouldn't trust it. But we didn't. No, we didn't. Actually, we looked for those kinds of things. We looked to see if, somebody was worried that Cornell might be Cornell students might be more influential than the others because they're so fancy and so forth. And we did not find that to be the case. But we only had a very small number of participants from Canada, and so I couldn't tell you. Even if we found that, though, I'd dismiss it as artifact. Yes?
Just really quickly on the same lines, was there evidence that students were exchanging other cues, like an introductory post, as far as expertise year in school, major things that would that might affect sort of how much weight a group members gave to a particular person's evaluation?
I think that's a good hunch, and in this particular study, nobody said I'm a community revitalization major. But what people did say very often was something like this happened where I grew up, and it was they tried something like this in here, and it was a complete disaster. The other thing that was very interesting in the study, I mean, we gave each person, like 30 facts, and what we found when our coders were going over the transcripts, with the list of facts and the transcripts of the comments, and our coders did a great job. Okay, this comment is fact number 47. This one, 13. Well, my lead coder came to me and said, I can't figure out which facts these comments are, and I should be able to do that. And I looked at it, I looked at the list, looked at the list. They were making up facts.
Those were the guys? You didn't worry about gender. Sorry.
I think you should.
Maybe so.
But were they allowed to bring their experiences, like you said, they were talking that they had observed something like that in their real life, then isn't their real life observation in a way a fact?
So you already know me well enough to tell what did we do when we saw, we thought about that, we thought about these facts, what did we do?
Let it be.
No, we analyzed the hell out of it. So we went back to the transcripts and we coded opinion, which is I think we should, or I think these things don't work very well. And we coded in my experience, or this happened in my town. So we counted opinion, experience, and then just bald on record fact. We called them bastard bits because they had no legitimate parentage. They just appeared out of nowhere. And people exhibited bastard bits in the direction of their pre-interaction preference, which is bizarre because you put a group together to deal with the information that is real, come up with the best decision of the facts that are known. And rather than do that, people prefer to have their own preference that they read in the first place prevail. People are just dumb sometimes. Or maybe it was just the men that did that. But I have a feeling it's a people thing. So that was a surprise. We decided we better stop and think this through and analyze it. That's what we did. Yes, please. I'm going to ask you to hold some questions. I just want to give you a brief taste of the second study because I promised you we would talk about a test of a theory that doesn't let people get together. And that's the test of electronic propinquity theory, which is, as I said, I'll catch up with the slides and I'll try to abbreviate because I know we spent a lot of time on the other things. Corzeni introduced electronic propinquity 30 years ago, and at the time it was a theory for electronic propinquity. Propinquity, as we know offline, is physical closeness, opportunities to interact and so forth. Corzeni said 30 years ago, electronic propinquity, feeling of closeness that you can get through a lot of electronic media. Sure.
So we have time for 3:15, so feel free to use it however you want.
Okay, thank you. So propinquity, psychological closeness over media, electronic proximity, electronic nearness, or electronic presence, that it should affect our satisfaction and our effectiveness in communication. Now, when Corzeni introduced this, he thought of it as an organizational communication theory, and he was dealing with the media of the time, which was face-to-face, closed-circuit video, and audio content. And it was a theory about that, but he also envisioned it as a grand theory of communication. How audacious. It was great. It's also a very formally laid out theory. I mean, there are very formally articulated axioms and derived propositions, in which propinquity is argued to be a function of any of these characteristics. Bandwidth, we're familiar with that. How many cues can be transmitted by a medium. Face-to-face has the most, video next, audio next, and as we would now say, CMC, which is only text, would have the very least bandwidth. But it can also be a function of mutual directionality, or the perceived mutual directionality is in a one-way or a two-way communication channel. Or information complexity. The more complex information is, the less propinquity that you perceive, that you experience in a conversation. So, make sense? Communication skills. Some of these show up in other theories that have come and gone since Korzeny, but now it gets a little bit more unique. Communication skills. The more communication skills you have, the greater the propinquity. Makes sense face-to-face. Why wouldn't it also be true using some kind of medium? And the more communication rules that are involved in the situation, the less propinquity people experience. And then finally, the proposition that's unique to this theory, I've never seen anywhere else, perceived choices among channels. The smaller the perceived number of choices among communication channels that you have, the more propinquity you experience. And I read this a number of years ago, and I thought, that's interesting. That's interesting. So I think we ought to talk about something face-to-face. I'd like to talk to my colleagues face-to-face to get to know them. But they're on the other side of the world, and we can't get together. Or I want to talk to Sri about a project. I can't make it down to North Carolina, and he can't make it up to East Lansing. And so I'm going to give him a call. But his voicemail system is not working. And now I've got email to use for him. And this theory tells me I've run out of choices, but the email is going to be just as propinquitous as anything else might have been. Now, if I could use face-to-face or email not too propinquitous. But as my number of choices gets smaller, the propinquity of the remaining choice should get higher. I thought that was fascinating. I read that a number of years ago when I was an assistant professor, and I thought, well, this is cool. This ought to work for CMC. What happened? And because you don't see this article anywhere. Well, I met somebody who knew Korzeny. And Korzeny was in San Francisco. He had opened his own marketing research business, still an active member of the International Communication Association. In fact, the directory listed his phone number. So I give this guy a call out of the blue. I said, Dr. Korzeny, I'm calling about this theory you wrote 25 years ago, which is not a phone call you expect to get. So he talked to me. He said, we tested it. It failed. That's why nobody cited it since then. I said, was it published? He said, yes. And I said, so I hung up and ran to the library to get this. Korzeny and Bauer, 1981. General hypothesis failed. Here's what they did. This is a scan from the article. So there's 2 rooms, and there's 3 people in each room. And obviously the other condition is 6 people in one room together. And here's your mediated condition. Here's a video camera pointing at these 3 people, a TV monitor. There's a video camera and a TV monitor in the other room. So this is the mediated condition. And there's another version with audio only, no TV camera. Just as you'd expect this experiment to be. So they manipulated bandwidth. They did something to manipulate rules. I can't remember what. And they had a hard task and an easy task. They also measured feedback, and they asked people to rate one another's skills after the conversation was over. We don't think that's the best way to deal with skills, but it doesn't matter. Outcomes were propinquity and satisfaction. And they didn't treat this proposition, my favorite proposition, the one about channel choice. They didn't do anything with that. It's too bizarre. When I read this, I got back to him and I said, Dr. Korzeny, you are a stronger theorist than an experimenter. I think there's a confound. What do you think? What do you think?
We had people
Face-to-face,
together and
face-to-face,
separate.
face-to-face, face-to-face. Always a choice. Face-to-face or mediated. Always a comparison. Is this a confound? So it took me a long time. We did this. We replicated the study. We wanted to test propinquity theory, see if we could demonstrate the confound, and extend it to CMC. Started this project, I don't want to tell you how many years ago. Came out last week. Methods, pre-test, people's communication and social skills. Pre-tested decision-making tasks to get high, medium, and low difficulty. Groups of 3 to 4 and we get the setting. We had pure media groups that had no choice of media, and we had mixed media groups that had choice. Now I call choice, I should put that in quotation marks. There were 2 media within the group. You didn't get to choose which you used, we assigned you to that, but you were cognizant that there were 2 media, just as in that other Korzenian-Bauer study. And descending bandwidth. So here's what it looked like. 3 people in a face-to-face group all in one room together. Or 3 people with video and audio conferencing in different rooms, but with the same communication media. Or 3 people with an audio only, or 3 people using text chat. All pure media conditions, no media choice involved. Compared to 2 people in one room face-to-face communicating with a third person via video. And now there's a higher bandwidth and a lower bandwidth channel, and everybody knows it. Video plus video, but one person over on the phone. Phone, and chat. With me? This is, in a sense, what Korzeni did, although I don't think he meant to. And if in this condition, if video is worse in this condition than it is here, then we see the effective choice, right? That's how we test it. Questions? This was so much fun. Here's the hypothesis. So forth. Here's we had to reinvent propinquity measures. We measured satisfaction, relational immediacy, media richness, and related theory also. Here you see 2 guys in the same room face to face with video conferencing with yet a third person. So there's cameras on them. The third person can see them on the screen. They can see each other on the screen. Everyone can hear, but there's 2 media in this condition. Propinquity scales. Video, no different when it's the higher of 2 communication media, and when all people have is video, the same as when it's higher. But when video is the worst of face-to-face and video, less propinquity via video. When phone is in the same is combined in a group where some people have video but somebody has phone delivers less propinquity. When phone is the only thing you have, higher. When phone is the higher of the 2, in other words, phone versus chat in the same group, phone is higher. Text chat was always the worst when there was a difference, but when everybody used text chat, propinquity was just as high as if you were face-to-face, as if everybody was face-to-face. So it was the choice, it was the comparative presence of 2 media in any single group that made the lower bandwidth media less propinquitous and less satisfying. The only significant effect on satisfaction was in this CMC condition, the text chat condition, but only when it was the lower of 2 choices, not when it was everybody was using text chat. So you know what happens when kids are using text chat. It's very immediate. It's very affectionate. And when that's all they've got, because it's past 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock and they can't get out, they make it propinquitous. They apply their communication skills. And it's very, very rich, as rich or richer than if they got together face to face. So what happens when you're a teleconferencing person and you're working with people all over the world? Do you need to get together face to face? Well, once you think that you can, you probably better. But if you decided that you really practically can't, I don't think you have too much to worry about. But like the attributional thing, it's a perceptual, it is to some extent a perceptual contrast phenomenon. In our research, we were able to find out it's not just a perceptual contrast phenomenon. I'm going to skip this one and show you this complex 4-way interaction effect, which I won't go on too much, but try to tell you though that skills do raise propinquity. When the task is easy, skills raise propinquity no matter what medium you're using. So more communication skills make chat better, make phone better, make face-to-face better. When a task is moderately hard, then if you have better skills, you achieve more propinquity using chat or phone. When the task was the hardest, when it was the hardest task, then people who have low and moderate communication skills are very much enhanced when there are no differences between media. If you've ever taught online or done distance teaching, and if you've ever done it when some of the people have video but not everybody does, have you ever taught when some people had video but some people didn't have a picture and only had audio? It takes extra work to adapt to it, doesn't it? You realize you can't use deictic phrases anymore. You can't say, let's all look at this, because the audio-only people don't know what this is. And so it takes extra work when you're working in two media at the same time. And when the task is hard, that was a killer if you don't have strong communication skills, at least in this particular setting. Now, none of this doesn't make sense to us, that communication skills are helpful when a task is moderately hard. None of that doesn't make sense. But who would have thought that the choice has a lot to do with it, having choice has a lot to do with it, and it would still be true when you're just typing with people. And task difficulty and so forth. And so I think we resurrected the theory. I think it was always valid, but they missed it because of a faulty test almost 30 years ago. And it's out this month in Communication Research. And I would be really happy if people saw how far we can go with it. And maybe not that far, but I think it was dismissed too soon. Where I'm going with the research, and I'll just spend a couple minutes on this because your questions have been very interesting. I want to read at least a few minutes for that. Where are things going? In some ways has to do with these other things, and in some ways kind of new directions for me. There are a number of people around the world working from the premise that computer-mediated communication attributes, the absence of visual cues, not all bad, sometimes very good. Sometimes they can facilitate effective bonds within small interacting groups of heterogeneous and potentially hostile members better than face-to-face interactions can. In other words, if you can get people who experience antipathy toward one another, if you can get them online when you couldn't get them in the same room, there might be some very promising possibilities. So no visual cues, asynchronous communication things that are editable. We know that can lead to very positive interpersonal communication. We know that people can selectively self-present their identities online. We know that people find interaction online manageable. These things may have promise for some interesting interactions. I've been focusing some attention just very recently, although I've been trying to think about this for a long time. I've recently engaged with some other people. We reviewed Malav studies. Ben Malav in Israel has put Jewish and Palestinian students online together. They discussed religion and holidays of the opposite groups. They learn about one another. They have positive outcomes. So you would think getting people online, this looks very promising. Ellis and Moaz, on the other hand, they have put Palestinian Jewish people online for discussion groups, adults, not children, and they find the hostility just increases. They find that the Jews and Arabs seem to have different linguistic argumentative styles, and when you put them online, they become more pronounced rather than less pronounced, and hostilities are not diminished at all. And so obviously just getting people online isn't enough. We need to, and that's, why would it be? What the dimensions are we need to look at. Here's some folks I've just kind of pitched my efforts to. Elaine Hoder, Ozma Ghanayem, and Mary Schoenfeld. They're doing some amazing work. All I have to do is tag along and bring some instruments, and we may find some amazing things. What they've been doing, each of them works at a teacher's college in Israel, but they work in their teacher's colleges serve 3 very different populations. Some of you will already know this. I was naive until I went to Israel last summer. I thought there were Jews and Arabs, and this just isn't the case. There are Christian Arabs and Muslim Arabs, but among the Jews there is great hostility among the religious Jews and the secular Jews. I also thought, even though everybody wants peace, I thought they wanted peace American style, where we put our shoulders, we work shoulder to shoulder together, and we integrate our neighborhoods and so forth. They want nothing less than this. So here's some results from some polling in 2002. Negative peace is the absence of violence. Positive peace would be integrated neighborhoods and jobs and colleagues and so forth. Structural peace is like what Brown Brown and Board of Education, 1954, said wasn't going to happen. Everybody has their own. And as you can see, nobody wants positive peace. Nobody wants anything to do with anybody. They want to be left alone. The different groups come at it differently. Well, what these three teachers have done, one of them works at a religious Jewish teachers college, one of them at a secular Jewish teachers college, the other at a Muslim college. But they're teaching, but they put their students, who are all prospective teachers themselves, in their course on using technology in education, they've made it a virtual course. And they put their students online in virtual teams. Here's what their virtual teams look like. And so you join these virtual teams as part of your class assignment. You're working with two students from each of the other two colleges, and you're doing these projects together. You are not overtly focused on your heritage or your differences. You're just there to you're there to learn how to use technology in teaching. And what they have been finding, the measures aren't strong, but it's very systematic. It seems to be very systematic finding that people are learning about each other along the way. They're learning to like one another. They're bonding in very strong ways. And of course, it's a critical population, because these people will then be influencing school children back in their native populations. 50% of these students' meetings are synchronous, 50% are asynchronous. And they have a face-to-face at the end of the semester where people get along. People are eager to meet each other and stay friends who would never have wanted to set foot in one another's neighborhood. Now, my job is to trail these people's efforts and see if I can bring what I know into some ways that we can measure what the underlying causal processes are. Can we demonstrate that these events are truly due to their process rather than things calming down 1 month or getting more tense the next month? So I'm really excited about this, and they welcome me into their projects. And so I think this is where it's going. I think propinquity, attribution, all these things have been, as happy as I've been to have published these works and shared them with people and talked about them and so forth, it's also been a journey for me that's given me a toolkit to see if we can do something really important. So I'm very excited about this. And be glad to take any and all questions on any of this stuff, please.
So in the study that found the negative effects for the adults, what was the area of discussion in that?
I think there was intercultural differences. I think I think they were focused on the Jewish-Palestinian problem.
Okay. So this, and this one they're talking about education.
How to use a wiki to do a unit on this.
Yeah. So what this suggests to me is really the framework to look at it in is a pretty standard conflict resolution style framework, whereby when people are are discussing something that they hold strong opinions about, you can't really get to because they're in a conflict setting already. They're not really going to come to an agreement. But when you don't have these very strong opinions one way or another, it's much easier to come to a sort of third space and have actual breakthrough discussions. You know,
I think that's a critically important hypothesis.
Yeah, this is getting to yes. It's,
yes.
And something like education and religion and cultural differences you wouldn't necessarily think, but they're not, they're not proselytizers, so they're not trying to convince each other that the other is wrong about their cultural beliefs.
No question that that's a very important variable that needs to be explored and explored and explored. At the same time, it may be, there's every reason to think that that is the case. And I wouldn't suggest that they change the focus of the teachers' dialogues and try to make it on the group. They've asked me, should we have a get to know each other before we start working on these projects? And I said, please don't try that yet. Should we exchange pic? What about Facebook? No Facebook. But another hypothesis that has some support and some work by Polzer and colleagues in, I think, organization science, is that once you change the virtual group of 6 from 3 to 3 into 2 plus 2 plus 2, that's a really potent change. And if you take 6 people and make them A plus A, B, C, D, E, and F, did I get them? Rather than A, B, 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 that's a big change in their trust and compatibility with one another. So that I think, much more mechanical, but ties in now to the more in social identity theory, the common in-group identity theory. Also not to be dismissed, lots of really potentially potent variables, very important set. We need to examine all of them. So far, we're lucky. This is working. Now, if we can figure out why for sure, we can spread the news.
Do you think, where you go back to that slide, you release a content, what you have that other statement. Don't you think that it would be, that you may actually be, you could easily reverse that and change your data and say some synchronity, at least the medium, given there's something inside people, not in the medium, so that people are seeking that medium that fits the appropriate problem you're trying to solve. And if you do that suddenly, placing it there makes media selection altogether different in the natural world, and maybe even explain why older media that, for example, resolve political problems, newspapers, but tend to be, the connection is not the same as it once was. It's like using the phone to do something you easily, the interaction with a user, right?
Very
so
good.
it may be something very much more fundamental even than you suggest. Actually.
Well, I think
reversing.
You're absolutely right. I mean, we operationalize choice in a very constrained kind of way. We reopen choice and say, what would you pick? And some people get choice and other people don't, perhaps.
Yeah.
This can become, and then this becomes a question of a newspaper story, followed by blog, followed by town hall meeting.
Yeah.
Some people prefer one, some people prefer another. We're seeing that now. So I think there's a lot more questions to be answered.
Well, I mean, even in a situation of a person where you have people making up facts, in a way, your experiment is not really about how you use facts, but how you resolve group dynamics. And in that case, in fact, it's convenient to just make it up. That exists in the real world all the time.
No question.
Just the social cohesion, the variable is not use of information, but how you use whatever information to resolve that social cohesion.
Well, that's very true. But at the same time, as we were coding, what happens if a member in a group says, why don't we add up all our information, whereas somebody says, why don't we use the majority rule? We were also able to assess what was the influence of made-up facts. And it won't surprise you to find that it led to worse decisions.
Worse decisions.
Worse decisions.
But the decisions, the way you define them, it certainly led to them resolving it for that time period.
Well, I agree with you. There's a certain artificiality about the hidden profile. At the same time, there's something very nice about it, because it's a nice way to show that you give people information, they exchange it in faulty ways. That's very true to life, but works against finding an optimal decision in a situation where information is knowable. So that's not every situation, but it sure is a potent way of describing those situations that match that. And you know, when we're looking at applications for graduate school, there's a finite set of information. How do we talk about it with one another? There are situations that match that description. Yes, please.
I have a follow-up question about your, like, in the beginning, like, 4-dot group.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, since we are communicating with each other in online bulletin board mostly, if you're changing their communication style, like asking them to go to a virtual conference, like simulating some face-to-face meeting, and if the geographic location is the only, like, in-group, out-group, like, distinction mark, will that actually be moderating their effects, that we have found?
Would they have communicated differently using another medium? Is this your question?
Like, will the in-group, out-group difference be just eliminated?
That's a great question. It's a great question. The truth is, I don't know. We're trying to get some research ready now, where people do see one another, but we're saying in some conditions you'll see the face and you'll see that they're wearing a Michigan Wolverine sweatshirt. And I don't know if Spartans versus Wolverines is a stronger out-group dynamic than Jews and Arabs, but it very well might be. There could be greater hostility. So there's questions about if people are have visual cues, but it's also signaling in groups and out groups, what would be the result of that? So good question, more questions to answer. I know many of you probably are expecting us to be done by now. If you need to leave, this is probably a great time. If you have any other questions, I'd be glad to hang around for 2 minutes. Thank you.